Morning, Kerri. Morning, Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining the GDN conversation series today. I'm so excited to be able to talk with my experts at the table about the good work that's going on with the Credentials Consortium and Credential Engine as we work to expand knowledge and capacity worldwide in the space of verifiable credentials and just digitization more generally. To our audience, the GDN Conversation Series is at least monthly webinar opportunity to engage and explore interesting areas that are affecting our field as we all work together collaboratively to advance credential and learner mobility and access to work and learning. With me today is Jeanne Kitchens from Credential Engine, an expert in the field, Kerri Lemoie, who's done some wonderful work with the DCC Credential Consortium. Welcome, friends. And I'm going to ask you, Jeanne, to start to maybe just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what brought you to this space.
Thank you, Joanne. Hello, everyone. I am Jeanne Kitchens. I'm the Chief Technology Services Officer at Credential Engine. And what that means is I help with, managing and developing the Credential Engine open technologies, including the Credential Transparency Description Language. And that has an acronym called CTDL and the Credential Registry. And at Credential Engine, credential transparency is our mission, and we care very deeply about that. We want to see improved opportunities for everyone, and so we do that through transparency and making these technologies openly available and programs to help people use them.
Thanks so much, Jeanne. Kerri, my apologies, my mute button. Go ahead, Kerri.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for having us here. So everyone, my name is Kerri Lemoie. I'm the director of the Digital Credential Consortium. We often shorten that to DCC. We're a consortium of universities in Europe and North America. We wrote the original white paper that actually kicked off the W3C verifiable credentials work globally. So our work is to advance the understanding and use of privacy-enhanced, portable, verifiable digital credentials in education. And we do that through open source development, leadership in the standards work, and research and advocacy. And we do projects like this with Credential Engine to help move forward all of this work. And we've been really excited to work with them on this project and happy to be here to tell you all about it.
Thank you so much, Kerri. And for our audience joining, my name is Joanne Duklas. I'll be moderating this conversation today. I'm the executive director of the GDN. Have a passion for building trust and ecosystems, convergence, and all that entails, And one of those key pieces is the whole area of interoperability. And I'd like to start with Jeanne and say, as you're building that trust ecosystem with the work you're doing with Credential Engine, you've described what your organization is about, but as you're building it, how do trust and interoperability play an important role with the good work you're doing? Unfortunately, Jeannie's audio has paused, so I'm going to ask.
Trust is vital. I think just sometimes the mic just needs to wake up. So it's still early where I am, but trust is vital. It's vital between all of us, and it's vital in these education and workforce development ecosystems. We have to be able to trust the information. And first off, if the information is not transparent, we don't really know how to trust it. It takes a lot of work to figure out how to trust it. So what we really want to do is enable ecosystems that can be trusted through open data and by following those standards, Joanne, right? So we want people to use the CTDL. We want people to follow the commonly used standards for verifiable credentials so we can build these trust ecosystems. So as more and more credentials are offered and more credentials are issued in digital ways, we need to be able to lessen the confusion out there on what they mean, are they legitimate, and so on and so forth. So that's really, where we're coming from. We want to see people succeed. We want to see pathways to success and in these learn and work ecosystems, and put the tools and strategies and technologies in place to enable that.
So without getting into too much detail at this point, because I know we'll explore it further and that we've got a good diagram from Kerri to show, may I ask, Jeannie, just for the sake of our audience, it's quite diverse, quite international, what's the data exactly that Credential Engine is moving around? And you don't have to get into details, just at a high level.
Yeah, the CTDL, the Credential Transparency Description Language, covers quite a bit of data. So let's think about how we describe credentials first off, and all the different types of credentials that are offered globally. So what we want to do is be able to move that kind of data around, but just information about credentials alone really isn't sufficient, because it doesn't really tell us what the value is of that credential. So the CTDL and the kind of data that can be expressed and, moved around and be discoverable is also the kinds of adjacent information, like where does that fit in an education and career pathway? What are the assessments that are, required to earn that credential? What is the transfer, the credit for prior learning that is applicable, say, to the courses that you have to take for that credential? So the CTDL has a lot of depth and a lot of breadth, and you want to think about all of the kinds of information that are vital to understand that credential and move it around effectively. And you know what? I can share links in the chat too for folks so they can check things out if they'd like.
That would be perfect, and we're happy to post them online. But just to put a pin on it, also what it's not. So you're not moving personal demographic data around.
No.
The ancillary data to support their success in pathway movement. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair and factual. Credential Engine, we do not deal with the personally identifiable information side. So we're not. We are as a platform for the descriptions of those kinds of things and resources that are vital to those pathways, so employers can understand them, of course, students, workers, credentialing organizations, and so forth can understand that data, but no PII in our world.
Perfect. And Kerri, I kind of want to explore a little bit, because I know you have a wonderful partnership that you're working on with Credential Engine. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. Plus, I'd be interested in your thoughts around the universe of trust and interoperability and the role of trust registries and all of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So I think if you think about in these terms, so Credential Engine and CTDL kind of provides the letter, right, of the credential that describes the credential, who is participating in the credential, the skill assessments, all of those things are part of what Credential Engine does. And what the Digital Credentials Consortium is doing is really focusing on the envelope, right? How is this delivered? How is it still secure? How can it be trusted? Right? Think about it almost as a digital form of a certified letter, right? And through the technology, you can certify, you can validate, has the credential, and I won't go too far, but is it verifiable, right? Has it been signed properly? Has the data been tampered since it was signed? And then also the part we're working on together is, how do we know that the identity of the issuer is known by a trusted organization? And that's what we're here to describe today, how that works. So the trust is really with who is the issuer, right? The trust is all the parts, right? It's the issuer, the learner, and also the verifier at some point, right? We need to know, can we trust the verifiers even? So there's a lot of trust that plays a role in these ecosystems.
And when I think about that, I think of the input side and the output side, and each of them and the path between all has a consideration and a component. Now, I know you have a wonderful diagram. I would love it if you could share it with our audience, just to help make it real for people from a visual point of view. And perhaps walk us through that a little bit, Kerri, as we're figuring out all the lingo and where this work you're doing fits with Credential Engine.
Yeah, can you see my slide now?
100%.
Great. I'm showing it on another screen next to me, so I may be looking in that direction. This is, by the way, a diagram that we've been using with our issuer advisory group. This is a group that Credential Engine, when you do a project with them, they often do have an advisory group, and we have an extensive group who we meet with monthly who advise us on this work. And so this is the slide we've been using with them. So in brief, let me just sort of walk us through it. You can see that, so our character, our person here, our learner here is Olivia. And so she's received a digital degree. Feel free to replace that with micro-credential certification, right? Or even a driver's license if it wasn't a university, because governments are doing this too, right? So the issuer says, we're awarding this credential to Olivia. We should come back to them maybe later, or folks should follow up with me about that later, because awarding and issuing are different things. So the institution says, we've decided that Olivia has earned this credential. So our software is going to make it possible for her to get that credential from us. They will let Olivia know, you have earned this credential, you can get this assigned version of it from us. And so Olivia will have an application, probably on a mobile device. That's normally how it works now. She will send a request, her app on her device will send a request to the issuer. The issuer will look up the information in their system. They'll generate the credential, they'll digitally sign it and send it back to Olivia. Okay, so in that point, it is Olivia's. It's a file on Olivia's device. It's associated with private keys, so she can prove that it's hers. Okay, and then when she shares this, say to apply for a job, that's one example of where these get used. A verifier can check that, one, it has been signed properly, so the digital signature is correct. That the data hasn't been tampered with since Olivia got it, so they know that it's still the same credential that the issuer awarded and issued, I'm sorry. And then, and this is the part right here of the project we're working on, the verifier can go and substantiate the identity of the issuer by looking in a trusted registry. And these registries could be hosted by any organization really in governments. As part of this prototype, DCC will host a registry, Credential Engine will be hosting one. And all these registries do as part of this project is to substantiate the identity of the issuer who signed that credential. And then the verifier knows that this is a trusted document. Jeanne, did I miss anything?
Well, I want to just sort of probe a little bit for the benefit of our audience. And let me say to our audience, please use the Q&A. Feel free to add context, add examples from your own experience, or throw in a question. And I promise you I'll do my best during our time together to weave it into the conversation, because I have a curious mind, but I'm not the only one who does. And I want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. So just on the point of the registries and what you've just described, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What you've been describing, all of it ideally is happening instantaneously once you set it up. Is that fair to say, Kerri?
I mean, I think so. It's very different than the systems we're used to currently, where, say, you have a platform that is literally issuing the credential. So, for instance, older versions of Open Badges 2.0, sorry. A badging platform would create this credential, and it would put it on their web server. And in that case, they're awarding and issuing at the same time. And it sits there, right? And it sits there until somebody wants to come and look at it. That is a very different process than this on-demand issuing process, right? That happens now. So it's very quick. It actually takes seconds. At some point, I'm happy to show folks a demo. Probably we don't have time today, but it literally takes seconds to get a signed credential from the issuing software into the wallet. And the verification also takes seconds. And this is actually a great use case for when someone, say, is applying for jobs and they want to prove their credentials on the fly, right? They could walk into an office, the credentials could be scanned, they're verified, and they could start working that day, right? In healthcare, that could be a very critical use case.
So I'm going to ask you, thanks for sharing this slide to help make it real with an actual use case of a learner, a citizen going on their walk. I kind of want to unpack that a little bit, because when I think about the learner experience and setting up these ecosystems, you've had a lot of experience, Kerri, with some of your work internationally. Can you tell us, just to situate this, What partners are you working with in addition to Credential Engine around the world? Because I want our audience to understand this is not a one country solution.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. First of all, the standards bodies we work in are global, right? W3C, Decentralized Identity Foundation. I mean, most of our team is always booked up at noon because we are talking to somebody in another country, right? Or at other parts in the evening. An organization that we work with quite a bit now is the Open Wallet Foundation. Our wallet software, open source wallet software, is actually shepherded by them. And they are investigating what is the alignment of the standards for verifiable credentials and digital wallets across the globe. So everything we do is taking into consideration how is this technology working across the globe, because we are considering the interoperability perspective, right? For instance, like a degree verification, people go from country to another. They sometimes have to prove this for visas. And so even the US government and the Canadian government right now, and I know others, are looking into how are we able to securely verify that somebody is enrolled in a university or that they have a degree for a visa purpose.
So I'm going to kind of throw out a question to Jeanne because I'm curious. You know, why is Credential Engine partnering with DCC and how are you exactly doing that? Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
I would be happy to. First of all, we just love working with Kerri and her team. But outside of that, our missions, substantially overlap and are, incredibly complementary. So we are providing, open standards, open data solutions for the descriptions of those verifiable credentials and the adjacent information that, in the example that Kerri just gave, where there are people that, as part of their jobs, they review credentials to, basically ascertain a person's qualifications. So making all of that transparent, interoperable, discoverable is very critical. And it completely complements the side of issuing, where Kerri is on understanding the issuing of these and those digital signatures and things like that. An issued credential, the information that it contains can be very terse, right? It's not a whole lot of information there. So including the credential transparency description languages, what we call CTID, unique identifier, will get you directly to the information about those credentials, about the offer and thereby issuer of it, and all that different kinds of adjacent information that I was describing. So it's, it's very complementary, and these pieces are necessary in these trust ecosystems to work together. So it's a very natural partnership and collaboration to work with DCC and Kerri and her team.
And I sort of want to ask you, Kerri, the flip side of that, what's your perspective on what DCC and their work with this innovative approach to using technology and standards? What value are you directly seeing from the partnership that you are pursuing with Credential Engine? And maybe use the use case of Olivia to help make it.
Well, in the diagram that I showed, there's that awarding institution who may also be the issuing institution. Well, their credentials could be listed with Credential Engine, so that the information, the issuer that is being looked up, we would know. Say, for instance, Credential Engine will be hosting a prototype issuer registry, and in the future, hosting this issuer information for identity. So it's critical that verifiers can not only see like, oh, there's an organization like Credential Engine who has all of this information about what this organization does, right, this institution does, and all of their credentials, we can really trust, right? We can place some trust also in Credential Engine and this issuer on behalf of them. And I'll say that, like, also because sometimes it helps folks to understand in comparison right now, the platforms that issue credentials, they are the arbitrator of trust of the identity of the issuer. And what we're doing is decentralizing this, but organizations like Credential Engine provide a lot of value in this space. And this is why we were really excited to work with them on it.
So I want to pull a thread you said, because there was a bit of cutout there. What Kerri was saying is that with this new approach to using this distributed type technology, they are distributing the ability to curate, move, share, access information to the learner.
Right.
So it's becoming a more federated kind of universe that's very much about Olivia, to use the use case.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Olivia's privacy in sharing her information. When she has that credential in her wallet, she's able to share it, much like you share your physical driver's license. The government doesn't know where you share your physical driver's license, right? And the same applies for these digital identity pieces and verifiable credentials, is you can share them in private with those that you need to share them with.
So I'm going to kind of throw a twister out here because I am curious. And before I do that, let me ask Gina, how many credentials information wise do you have in your repository to help give some texture to the opportunity here?
Well, the so the credential registry, that is a moving target, Joanne, because every day, literally every day, new data is coming in there. So I honestly used to know, and now I have to go look. We do have a credential finder. It is a tool for seeing all of the data in the registry. And what that means, it's an interface that people can use. And when you're looking at it, you are just literally seeing the data, the equivalent of the data, the raw data in the registry that basically makes this credential finder useful. So here, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the credential finder so folks can take a look. But there are collectively millions of data points, because the way the CTDL is developed is with a linked data structure, and the way the credential registry is provided is it is intended to be able to get directly to any top level piece of information with a CTID based on attributes of that data. So basically it can be queried in many, many different ways. But like right now, we're at over, we're close to 93,000 credentials, for example, and there are 9,000, almost 9,500 competency frameworks. And we use competency framework, broadly as an umbrella term. It could be learning objectives, performance objectives, learning outcomes. Different communities of practice call them different things. RSDs, you may have heard of. So it covers, our modeling covers all those kinds of competencies, and the individual competencies you can go directly to each individual like learning objective. And there's over 150,000 of those in the registry at this point. So it is ever growing. We are working with, many publishers of data in many different ways. And we're also always thinking about and improving upon our publishing system. How can we get the data in ways that's open data, right? That's out there on the web, but unstructured and very difficult to find and use. How can we help scale that, getting that data and putting it in the registry in useful ways? So we're always working on those kinds of things and improving the processes.
So we have a diverse audience today, and we'll even in terms of the video later. So I just want to pin a couple of things because I want to make sure we're speaking to everybody. And I have a question. We use the term standards, right? Scalability, et cetera. My sense of that, because sometimes it can be misinterpreted. Sometimes people can interpret that, in fact, you're changing their content. Can you speak to that a little bit, Jeannie, and perhaps alleviate some concerns around some of this space?
Well, yeah, the idea of we're talking about data standards, and the data standard is not is not the verbatim content, right? So, every credential offer, for example, has their own way of defining a competency, for defining their credentials. So we are not imposing rules upon how you do that. What we do is provide the language. So no matter how you determine you should, define your competencies or your credentials, the data standard ensures that any application or human, because the CTDL is human and machine readable. It's based on, a linked open data structure to make it that way. And it's more about making sure you have you know exactly what that data will mean, what is in the name, what is a description. So it's not about imposing you have to write something a certain way by any at all. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that, think, well, competencies should be, shared and they don't need to be repeated and those kinds of things. But the reality is that, different schools, different employers, right? They're all going to have their own requirements for how you have to complete something or how you qualify for something. But by having the CTDL and having all that data out there, tools like AI can do that. They can find those alignments, those semantic alignments between employment and between learning. So it's really an enabler also for those kinds of scaling solutions, to help people understand, but what does it mean? And
Yeah.
how does the work side and the learning side, come together?
Yeah, so there's those threads of transparency,
Yes.
aiding accurate interpretation, making sure there's clear understanding of what was explored and experienced by the learner, et cetera. This resonates with me. Kerri, I'm going to throw another question at you. And I'm going to set some context here. I've been doing this work since 1990, literally. Lots of dye in the hair, shall we say. But as part of that, I have always been dealing in the world of verifiable credentials. It's just the way we would verify was very different, get a sealed envelope or have something mailed direct from an institution to us.
Mm.
Today, with the work that you're doing, how would you define verifiable credentials given the context? Because someone might say, well, we're already doing that. I get it direct from the institution. What's different?
So first, let's just talk about the term verifiable credentials. So there's a web standard called at the World Wide Web Consortium called verifiable credentials. It is an actual standard, a metadata standard, just like Jeanne was talking about, that describes how claims can be proven online. And so that is very different than how we've done verifying in the past. Sometimes I think that the name verifiable credentials of the standard has caused confusion in the education space because of that, but it's what we have for now. So think about it as W3C verifiable credentials or W3C VCs. And I think it's important to realize the difference between now and then is that the internet is very different. The web is very different. We are seeing large data spaces, data warehouses being hacked regularly. We don't know how verifiable those are anymore, right? So the way to be able to prove ourselves online is becoming more and more important. Some are even talking about how do we prove that we are humans and not machines, right? We are moving into this space on the web, and we need to make sure that people can prove what they know and what they can do in this new environment.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I just want to add one more thing to what Jeanne was saying that I think is an important point, because she talked about human and machine readable and how they use this JSON linked data for the structure. Part of that reason why it works is that in every single credential, and also with CTDL, is there's something called contexts, which are vocabularies. And these vocabularies are linked to with every single credential so that humans and machines know exactly what the meaning is intended by all of the properties. So that helps facilitate the understanding of what is intended to be communicated.
That's very helpful. And when you're thinking about this project that you're collaborating on, just to get the basics, when did you start working together on this, and where are we at now, and where are you taking it?
Jeanne, do you want to start with that, or would you like me? Why don't you start?
Okay, well, we started in May of 2024. Where did 2024 go? Somebody stole it from me. And our initial project that is specifically concerning issuer registries concludes May 2025. So we are almost there in terms of, a project timeline. And this project that we're working on has deliverables, And so some of the things that we're doing. We have an issuer registry advisory group, and it has been fantastic and so important because, as we're talking about transparency, we're talking about open. What's also really vital is that people are providing input into the design and, how these kinds of technologies are best, utilized and the best practices around them. So we actually have a fairly large issuer registry advisory group, and Kerri, with her expertise and her team, has been doing a lot of research on, what are the specifications applicable to issuer registries and what are the best for the current situation in the, in the landscape, at least for the issuer registries at DCC, and Credential Engine will stand up as a part of this project. So we are both prototyping issuer registries. And again, an issuer registry is not issuing the credentials. It is literally a listing of the organizations that, that issue those credentials. So what we can do at Credential Engine is we can use the data in the credential registry to create issuer registries that are for the purpose of verifying, did this issuer, did this organization issue this credential? So let me toss it over to Kerri to add.
Sure. Yeah, everything that Jeanne said. And as part of the research that we've been doing, when we first started, we did this landscape analysis of all types of registries, right, in the world. What are people using registries for? How are, what standards are they using? Because we were evaluating this from the perspective of learning and employment records, right? What is needed to prove the identity of an issuer in this technology type, right, in this type of verifiable credentials? So we did that analysis, and then we also took it one step further, and we said, well, we know that every registry may be different organizations. There might be hundreds of these, right? Maybe thousands in the world, right? And we know that this is, by the way, foundational research. No one has done this yet, so we needed to start somewhere. So what we did was we explored, what would the governance be for each of these registries? How do verifiers know who these organizations are about? What technology are they using? What rules do they have for adding somebody to their registry? So we've explored it. We've used a framework called about organizational trust, a trust model that we've been sort of evaluating. What is the ability, benevolence, and integrity that can be described so that people will trust these registries, right? And of course, all of this is, once again, like Jeanne said, it's new, it's foundational, but we also had to decide to start somewhere. So we made a decision after all of our analysis of the technical specifications to choose one and go in that direction. It's an OpenID Federation specification. A critical point of why we are going to be recommending one type of spec and this model of governance and how we would do this in the report that we deliver in May is we want to start with interoperability, right? If verifiers are going to find these registries useful, they don't want them to be all done in different ways. That would take so long for them to try and figure out all the different registries. We want to provide a model that they can start with so that verifiers know what they can do to make it easier for them to, use this, right?
So you talk about the importance of this work and the timelines and so on. Let me ask you this question. And I see one of my colleagues has actually put a question. I'd like to honor that. As EdTech expands, and Hank, I'm just going to read it out for you. As EdTech expands across the thousands of applications, fostering relationships for projects and IT collaboration is absolutely essential. His question is, can you touch on the critical need for seamless integration and connectivity? And I'd like to start with you, Kerri, since you've got the DCC Consortium. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm reading a question, Hank, to make sure I understand it. I mean, this is what standards are for, right? This is why standards bodies exist, right? The web works the way it does because there are standards, right? Many of you might be familiar with Internet Explorer and all the pain we went through when websites didn't work the same on Internet Explorer as they work in other places. So the aim is to get involved in the standards work and apply the standards as they are provided so that we can enable this interoperability and this consistency amongst ed tech and the world, honestly. I mean, I think we should think beyond just ed tech. We should think about the applications of that everywhere, right? Like a lifelong learning approach is that what we're doing here is not just about our small time that we spend in formal education. It is a lifelong experience. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers your question, but happy to follow up on it with you.
So I think, and I'm going to touch base with you, Jeannie, on this one, but I think what I'm hearing, just to pull a thread, is if we think about this from Olivia's perspective, using again that learner journey idea that you shared earlier, and a friend of mine once said, you know, when they make a phone call around the world, they don't care about the underlying technology. They just want to make that phone call, and they want to make sure they get to who they need to with the information they need to have. So using a metaphorical example, I think that's why connectivity and integration is important for that, for Olivia, for that end user. Why might it be important for, let's say, governments or let's say business? So, Jeannie, you're not for profit. You know, you've explained Credential Engine and why you do this, but what do you think you're contributing to help enhance the ROI, for example, for a business with this kind of work, or for a government that's looking to achieve its policy goals? And your audio is off, Jeannie.
It's on. It was asleep. It had to wake up. Sorry. It's very
That's okay.
persnickety that way. But at Credential Engine, you know, we are based in the United States. We definitely work globally. So we're not just thinking about the United States, but we are here. And to really scale, we work with state governments because they have authority in those states. They have data, they have authority, they have jurisdiction. And credential transparency is very important to these states. You know, you can, they are responsible for, you know, approving programs, are responsible for, you know, student success in their state. So it is vital to them to state these topics of interoperability. Even after students, you know, have completed programs, they have longitudinal data systems, right? So they're storing this data so we can understand, you know, what are the outcomes, you know, what are the metrics that resulted in these programs and going to work. And then, of course, on the employer side, you know, as we're talking about these trust ecosystems, employers, you know, are doing things like hiring companies to verify, right? Verify experience, verify credentials. What we need to do is have just exactly as Hank said here, you know, as these applications, diverse applications that are, you know, essential, there will always be many, many applications out there in the world. And of course, now, you know, everybody thinking about how AI can even further scale things. We still have to have the seamless integration and connectivity, and that's going to come from the standards, and it's going to help, you know, employers make better decisions in faster ways that benefit their companies. It's going to help the students who want that mobility and are kind of left, you know, hanging in our current, you know, hiring systems, you know, and those kind of governments that really need to ensure the success of their community. So all of it comes together, all of it is essential.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done some, as you know, I've done some of this work, created trust registries and so on, or helped to enable things. I did provide, and I see Kerri and Jeannie, you're actively using the chat. Thank you to share links. There was an interesting study that you made me think of, so I did pop it in the chat, where it looks at the concept of you don't have to have one trust registry. You don't have to have one arbiter to say this is valid. You can actually have many, and the fragmentation is not a bad thing. But it does beg the question about quality and quality assurance. Is it fair to say, and maybe Kerri, I'll throw this question to you, that one of the advantages of some of this connectivity and integration is to make sure there's supports in place to ensure quality assurance in the sharing process, in the interpretation process, in the hands of the learner? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and then I'll try to back into this a little bit in the way you asked. One is that right now the registry we're working on is really just about issuer identity. There are lots of other reasons for these registries to exist, right? Accreditation bodies, governments, and so forth, and Credential Engine also, right? There are other resources that these credentials link to. Once again, they use something called linked data, which means that there's resources available that can be connected to from within each credential. So I think that there are maybe even more opportunities with this technology as more adopt it for quality assurance. And I think the trust is embedded in how the technology works. I think it is going to take people some time to understand that and why that is different. But I think as we all are starting to experience with the web, we can understand why we would want to have our data in this format, why we would want to have access to it and control over the privacy. But I think models will have to change because of this. And I think it's an interesting time to explore this. Right? We don't have privacy regulations, at least in the United States, for this type of data. But learning and employment data can reveal a lot about individuals, and it could introduce bias, right? So we need to consider all of these possibilities of what this will introduce and what we will need to move forward with. So this could be, I mean, I think this is going to be a great paradigm shift in introducing how we could do this better. We've been relying on old systems for a long time. Like, how could we do this in a new way that actually values learners and individuals?
And I just want to pull the thread on quality with you, Jeannie. You talked about you having competency frameworks in the CTDL information and data set and so on. In my world, there could be a variety of quality assurance frameworks, qualifications frameworks. There could be local learning outcomes for any type of credential program, what have you. Tell us a little bit about how Credential Engine is shoring up that quality piece as part of its good work.
Yeah, and it's, it's an important aspect of the whole trust, the idea of trust ecosystems. And I'm sure the folks participating with this webinar and who'll be all watching it as well will have different, ideas what quality means and what quality assurance means. And, the range of accreditation, to these many different types of quality assurance kind of organizations that have emerged to say, look at the quality of an online course, for example. There's many of these types of organizations in the US because in the United States, we currently do not have the notion of a qualifications framework that many other countries, have. So those kinds of qualifications, or I'm sorry, not qualifications, quality that I was just mentioning are with the CTDL, data can be published and made open and transparent by those kinds of organizations that issue different types of quality and linked to those credentials and learning opportunities and so forth. And just recently we finished what we call a task group for expanding the CTDL with experts on qualifications frameworks. And those are frameworks that are embedded in qualification systems. And what that, by qualifications, we're really talking about what we call credentials in the US. What are the different credentials that people can earn? And what are the defined levels in what we call progression models where those credentials are aligned? And we just recently, actually on January 31st, updated the CTDL to include describing qualifications frameworks, to also include aligning levels of qualifications frameworks to each other so different countries can align their levels and qualifications frameworks. And of course, to be able to say, this credential offered by some specific organization is aligned to a very specific level in any given qualification framework. So we've updated the CTDL to cover those kinds of areas, and we're working on our publishing system now, and we will be piloting that the first half of 2025 with countries that manage qualification systems. So as I said earlier, we're always thinking about how can we improve upon, the way that we're doing things to scale things and the CTDL to support the kinds of information that is useful as linked open data that is, interoperable and can move around.
So I kind of want to change the needle a little bit because you talk about it'll take time. Kerri, I think you use that phrase for people to get comfortable with. In my experience, um, and I do see on our call, there's industry partners. So they're probably early adopters because they're here listening to this space and so on and thinking about how to adjust their technology and practices, et cetera. What strikes me when the work that we were doing in one of the region where I live, which was Canada, we were working on a national network. We were implementing VC tech. But we found industry, even large organizations, wasn't quite ready for it. There was an adoption challenge there. And I've seen some wonderful innovations around the world, including ones that you have, where, learners can actually go and to a pub, for example, and say, this is who I am, this is my age. So therefore you can serve me. That would be so accessible. But why should a pub accept that from a phone? Why should an industry like a hospital accept this technology and trust what someone is giving them on their phone, assuming they don't have the capacity to set up their systems with APIs so that they can better receive and consume this? Kerri, what are some of your thoughts around that?
I mean, for some first thoughts actually, and we're talking about this a lot now. How do we make verification easier? How do we make it part of browser plugins? How do we, and our phone and others, our apps do it, others do too, which is how do you just scan it and look at it right there in person, right? That works as well. So I think there's work to be done in the user experience for sure. And I think across the board for institutions, learners, training providers, but definitely the verifiers, we have to do some more user experience work there. I think you'll find though, in terms of, these being adopted and used, all right, once they are issued, at least in our space, in the education and training space, and especially in the US, and I know in Europe and other countries too, especially like Taiwan, for instance, they are actually getting themselves involved in like in the private industry, right? They're taking on initiatives where the states and governments are working with employers to help them understand it, help them use it, and work with organizations like Credential Engine to make sure that the information is in there, that they would know what to expect so they could understand it, right? So I think there's a lot of work going on there to move this forward. This isn't just like a technology, it is very contextual and it needs to be understood in the different contexts.
I just want to do a shout out for one of our partners, TISAP, which is a international professional association that is advancing supports for our credential evaluators around the world that need to consume this kind of information in its various formats. They've done a really interesting study. I was just trying to find it on the web. So from a best practice point of view, if we were to explore that space a little bit, what I would be suggesting to the audience is when you're thinking about that end consumer, that end user that Kerri's talking about, not just the learner, it's not just the company or government that's hiring somebody, it's also that in-between group that do the recognition evaluations and so on. So I think it's probably fair to say I agree with you, your comment about more research and work in this space in place. So I'll just flag that particular study. If I can find it, I'll put it in the chat for everybody as one example. Another is our wonderful Enoch Narek network around the world who are professionals in interpretation. And I know Credential Engine is doing some interesting work with ACRO in the US to help facilitate and continue to grow that surety of information and transparency that this good work underpins. I'd like to explore a little bit about how others can get involved in this kind of work. How can the roster, we have people on the line from South Africa, from all over the world, just to give you some examples. How do they get involved in this kind of work? I mean, we've got the links. How do we learn more? Maybe I'll ask Jeanne to go first.
Sure. Yeah, glad to. Well, for Credential Engine, there's, direct and indirect ways that you can actively participate. If you want to get involved in developing the credential transparency description language, we have a CTDL advisory group. It meets bi-monthly. It's a great way to, stay tuned into what's going on and to provide direct input into our work. And as we then identify where we need to significantly, expand the CTDL, we form task groups and they're open to any interested person. So that's how we did the qualifications framework development. We brought on a large group of experts out there around the globe to help with that. So we have those kinds of opportunities. Our technologies are open. And you can also actively participate by actually publishing your data as CTDL linked open data. And you can use our system to do that. We have guides, we have all kinds of resources and information for doing that. So, we really also not only want to encourage, just actively participate in the development of the system to make it better, but actually make it better, by making your data available as CTDL linked open data. So I'll drop a couple links in the chat.
And Kerri, is there any sort of feedback you want to give on that line of questioning?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Digital Credential Consortium is a membership organization. And we're membership-based, universities, institutions, and higher ed, post-secondary institutions. Our members are really driving a lot of this work. So we take very seriously meeting with them, taking their input, asking them what is needed in this space. And this affects all of the development that happens in the standards and all of the open source software that we provide that many of them are using, right? So it's a cooperative effort. So we welcome people to join us. It's also worth noting that all the work we do is transparent, open source, right? Like I said, our software is all MIT licensed. Anyone can take it and use it. We're happy to answer questions about it. But we also have publications online that I link to. We have a wiki that we're developing more and more, and we have community calls. In fact, today, in about an hour, we have a community call with Western Governors University, who's going to present some of their research with the Aspen Institute. And I can put a link to that if others are up for another webinar today. So I would say, follow us on LinkedIn. And you'll learn more about where to participate. And lastly, in terms of like the standards development, if that's something you're really interested in, the two organizations you want to consider, or the three, one is in education, it would be One Ed Tech. They are doing the work with the Open Badges standard, the Comprehensive Learner Record. So you can participate in that work. The W3C, which is a World Wide Web Consortium, there's a credentials community group, and then there's also the Decentralized Identifier Foundation. Progressively get even nerdier as you go. So if you're really ready to get into the tech with us, that's where you can find us.
And I will just add to that there is a group that Alex Jackal is leading that the GDN is supporting, which is Emergent and Credential Engine is part of, which is Data Standards United, which is really an effort to break down some of the shall we say, organizational or community-based or sector-based, I don't want to call them barriers, but practical realities where certain standards grow up around certain use cases or certain communities. And my sense is we're reaching a space where we have to ladder over them, which is what Data Standards United is also seeking to do. So people may want to Google that and consider exploring that space. There's also some interesting work going on in places like Europe in this space with the EPSI work, etc. And so I think people will want to probe into that. And this is where our organization, the GDN network, we're an international organization. The home is in the Netherlands. So we're a European public benefits organization. As I said earlier, I serve as the executive director. So one of our mandates is to try and bring people together, the thought giants around the world, to learn from each other and be a catalyst for change and collaboration and convergence of opportunity. And I just want to pull a thread that I heard from both of you today to catch your validation on this. Really what I'm hearing is growing support for concepts like the lifelong learner, privacy by design, placing some of the information that matters specifically to a citizen, a learner, in their hands so that you can advance rapid access to work and learning. Just by a nod of heads, did I kind of encapsulate that well? Is there any
I think
piece you
so.
want to
Jeannie, what do
add?
you think?
Go ahead, Kerri.
No,
Joanne,
I
you
was
did a
just
great
thinking
job.
that was pretty good. I think how I liked how you I like that thread. I like how you
Okay.
slided it. So thank you. I'm
The
sorry.
other
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thread I want to quickly draw is you have mentioned throughout our session today governance,
Mhm.
and you talked explicitly about examples. And we do have one of our colleagues on the line that's passionately interested in this space, and I know she's listening closely and noting all those kinds of things. I want to give the final word to that topic since it advances interoperability and trust. What's that one best practice in your project together, or perhaps other projects, that you think we should be mindful of as it relates to governance if we hope to have success with this kind of collaboration? And Kerri, you may have to hop off, so please tell me your thoughts on that.
Sure. I also, by the way, I want to point out that I forgot to mention the LER Accelerator project that we're in. So I put a link to that. Folks should check that out. Communication. I think governance is communication. I think that's the most critical part, that people understand what the governance is so they can understand it and make their own decisions about whether they trust it or not. So I think communication is key.
And Jeanne, what would you offer?
Yeah, governance has to be transparent and it has to involve people. So it's not something you come up with in a silo. It's got to be involving the stakeholders who, need to have a say on, again, what that trust, building that trust and what kind of governance is needed to build it.
So I would like to say that the other thing I heard was the open source and open standards. For those in our audience, there is a difference. Open standards is about those data exchange protocols for and structures for moving data around so that it's transparent. Open source is actually, correct me if I'm wrong, the actual programming code being available for people to use around the world. So when we talk
Right.
about international organizations benefiting from this work, both of you have used those terms. You've said your work is open source and open standards, which means that anybody can actually access the information and figure out and work through it with a goal to enable possibility and opportunity for citizens and learners in their space and place. So I do encourage our audience to take a look at some of the links that all of us have been sharing in the chat. I want to thank our two speakers today. This is part 2 of a series we're doing to kind of unpack not just moving student data around, personal data, but what about that ancillary data? And how can it complement work such as the work that you're doing, Kerri, at DCC, to actually put tools in the hands of the learner to give them control and agency over their credentials, over their learning, over their translation experience to future employers, future education institutions, and the like. So I can't thank you enough. I invite my audience to join us for part 3. It'll be in about 2 weeks. You can go to the Groningen website, and we're going to do the technical lifting of the hood. A little bit more slides. We're going to have our experts come in and try to make sense of the secret sauce of some of this. So I encourage you, if you have technical people, technical staff, and experts that actually want to pull the hood up a little bit and get into some of that so that they can actually get the ABCs of what it is, how to do it, and how they might practically apply it. We invite you to join us. We also have another series we're soon to launch, which looks at the whole concept of trust registries, trust frameworks, the trust ecosystem. It will have panelists from across the ecosystem around the world as we seek to help to learn more, myself included with my curious mind, learn more about this VC space, this registry space, and what does all this mean for practically for efficiency, connectivity, interoperability, governance, and the like. So we'll be exploring lots of dimensions of this with our experts. We will have a PCCAT with our Canadian colleagues convening in Toronto, May 28th, 29th, and 30th at Centennial College, one of our wonderful signatories and board members. And we have an Oslo convening October 29th, 30th, and 31st, 2025 with the Norwegian government and SICT, that's an expert group in technology. And lastly, we're working with South African partners to do an October 2026 South African convening so that we can continue to build out and support our communities around the world. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kerri and Jeanne, and I wish everybody a great week.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.